312 lights vanished from the tactical display in a single breath. High Marshal Thalvok did not blink. He couldn't. His four amber eyes only widened, the segmented pupils contracting as the debris field replaced his own fleet on the screen. Ozone hung thick in the war room, and metal groaned somewhere below decks, a sound his ship had never made before, not in 93 years of service. He had brought 1,247 guns to end a war that hadn't started yet. Now his hull was coming apart around him, and the humans hadn't fired a single missile that anyone could see. "Report," he said. His resonators buzzed with static, the vibration crawling up through his own jaw. No one answered. Vex Kell, his tactical officer, stood frozen at his console, mandibles clicking without sound. 47 years the humans had waited in silence, and it had never once looked like a threat. Now it looked like a debt come due. "What are they?" That was all Thalvok managed before the wave reached his chair. "I wish I could tell you the silence ended there. It didn't. Stay close." 47 years earlier, or rather, 47 years before that final breath, the Grey Reach had been the quietest patch of space in the galaxy. Nothing lived there, nothing moved there. That was the point of it. The silent vigil drifted at the edge of that quiet, engines cold, running lights dim to nothing a passing sensor sweep would ever notice. Its hull carried the scars of 5 decades of micro-impacts, small dents from dust and drifting ice, patient wear from patient waiting. From a distance, it looked like debris. Up close, it still looked like debris. That was also the point. Inside, Captain Elias Rourke poured his coffee at 0400 hours. He always poured it at 0400. Some habits outlast the reason for them, and this one had outlasted 26 years of cargo runs and 19 years of something else entirely. He carried a brass pocket watch in his jacket pocket, the same one his father had worn the day the mining colony collapsed. He pulled it out now and turned it once in his scarred left hand, the knuckles still ridged from gripping wreckage 2 decades ago. 47 ticks a minute, when it should have been 60. It had never been right. He had never fixed it. "Ships crossing the boundary," said Lieutenant Denzel Okonkwo from the sensor station. He counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, a habit left over from a collapsed tunnel he didn't talk about, not even with Tanis, who'd heard the story secondhand and never brought it up. "Big ones, sir. A lot of them." Commander Mira Tanis didn't look up from her diagnostic panel. Her father's dog tags hung against her collarbone, the metal worn smooth from 20 years of the same nervous thumb. Shields at full, weapons locked. "Same as yesterday. Same as every day," Rourke said, and closed the watch. He walked the length of the bridge once, hands behind his back, the way he did every morning whether anything was happening or not. It settled his crew more than any speech could. Tanis had told him once that the crew called it the perimeter check, though there was no perimeter to check, just 11 meters of deck and 3 duty stations. He let them call it whatever they wanted. "Talk to me, Denzel," he said, stopping by the sensor station. 47 ships on the leading edge. Formations loose, like they're not expecting anyone to be watching. Okonkwo's jaw worked. "Which, I guess they're not. Wrong. I mean, they're not expecting anyone." "Sorry, sir. You're allowed to be wrong out loud," Rourke said. "It's the only place I want it happening." Tanis almost smiled at that. She'd heard him say it 100 times, in 100 quiet mornings, and it still landed the same way every time, like a hand on the shoulder that didn't need to say anything else. The Karathi Dominion had conquered 14 systems in the last century and a half, each conquest carved into High Marshal Thalvok's chest as a ritual scar. 14 parallel lines that never fully healed. The 15th would take 43 seconds to end their certainty, though nobody on the silent vigil said it that way yet. They just watched the boundary line and waited for the numbers to climb, the way they had watched it climb and fall back to nothing for 47 years running. 6 light hours away, aboard a modest observation vessel, with no weapons and no ambition to have any, Ambassador Lisai of the Valieri watched the same boundary line with older eyes. She had lived 6,800 years, and in all that time she had learned exactly one lesson worth repeating to anyone who would listen. The quiet ones were never quiet because they had nothing to say. 19 years ago, a human diplomat had told her something she hadn't understood. He'd been an unremarkable man, gray at the temples, and he'd said it almost as an aside, the way people mention weather. "We don't raise our voice until we mean it." She had filed it away as a curiosity, one small oddity among thousands she'd catalogued over the centuries. She understood it now, watching the Armada cross into the Reach. and the understanding sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close. They're not evacuating, Thalvok said. 3 hours before the wave that would end him. He stood in his own war room, ozone thick around his obsidian carapace, the 14 ritual scars catching the low red light. A colony of 14,000 souls, and they aren't running. Perhaps they don't believe the threat is real, High Marshal, said Vexkel. His 4 eyes flicked toward the projection table where New Canaan colony sat, rendered in soft blue light farmland. 4 defense platforms, no fleet to speak of. Or perhaps, Thalvok said, they've simply never been taught to be afraid. He said it the way he said most things, flatly, with the certainty of a man who had never once needed to reconsider a plan mid-execution. In 37 years of campaigns, no enemy had ever made him ask a second question. The first had always been enough. He gave the order. His fleet, 1,247 ships strong, the largest single deployment in Karathi history, began its slow crawl toward New Canaan, 14 light-years further into human space. The armada moved like a tide going out, patient and enormous, each vessel a small city armed for conquest. He did not know about the silent vigil. Nobody did. That had always been the entire design, a ship built in secret over 29 years. In the one stretch of space, nobody bothered to watch, doing nothing at all until the day it needed to do everything. Back on the vigil's bridge, Okonkwo lost count of his breaths and started over. 14:15, sorry sir, lost it. You're not nervous, Tanis said, not looking up. I'm counting how many seconds it takes them to realize they made a mistake. Rourke almost smiled. He didn't, though, not yet. There was a version of this morning where he let himself feel something about it, and that version came later after the shooting stopped, if it stopped the way he expected it to. He walked to the viewport instead, a rare thing, since most of what the vigil saw came through sensors, not glass, and looked out at nothing. The gray reach didn't have stars close enough to matter, just the long dark, and somewhere in it, coming closer by the minute, over 1,000 ships that had never once lost a fight. The shields on the silent vigil had been tested against simulation after simulation for 47 years. They had never failed once, not in a single run, not against anything the engineers back home could throw at them on paper. The Karathi had no idea what they were about to hit, and if Rourke was honest with himself, which he tried to be most mornings over coffee, neither did he, not entirely. Theory was theory. This would be the first time anyone found out for certain. Admiral Octavia Reyes watched from Watchpoint Station, 6 light-years back. 2 photographs of her dogs taped beside the comm panel. Sagan on the left, Kepler on the right, both mid-bark in whatever moment she'd caught them in. She had not raised her voice in 42 years of service. She didn't raise it now. Captain Rourke, she said, her voice level is still water, you are cleared to hold position. You are cleared to respond if fired upon, nothing more. Cop that, Admiral, Rourke said. We'll be here. He always was. The Armada's outer edge crossed the 12-light-second mark. 47 ships broke formation first, an advance wave testing the water the way an old habit tests a locked door, not expecting resistance, just confirming it wasn't there. Rourke set his coffee down and opened a channel. Unidentified fleet, he said. Voice even unhurried. This is the Terran vessel Silent Vigil. You are entering a restricted zone. Please adjust your trajectory by 3 degrees to port. The response when it came was laughter translated through a resonator into something like a growl, low and rasping and entirely without concern. They think we're joking, Okonkwo said. We're not, Tanis said. The 47 ships opened fire. Missiles first, a scattershot volley meant to probe rather than kill. Then plasma torpedoes, brighter and faster, chewing orange trails through the dark. Then a spray of kinetic rounds meant to overwhelm anything smaller than a moon. A wall of metal thrown at a target that, by every reading on Karathi sensors, should not have still been intact 30 seconds later. The Silent Vigil took the first impact without so much as a shudder on the bridge. Then the second. Then the rest, 1,247 strikes in under 20 seconds. A storm that would have cracked open any warship in either fleet's recorded history. Rourke sipped his coffee. Shield integrity, Tanis reported, watching the readout tick down by a hair, then hold. 99.8%. Okonkwo stared at his console like it had lied to him. That's sir, That's nothing. Their weapons are barely scratching the paint. They've never fought anything real, Tanis said quietly. And there was no triumph in it, only a kind of tired recognition, the way you'd describe weather you'd seen coming for years. On Karath's spire, Thalvok watched his own tactical display and felt something he hadn't felt since the scar on his mandible was new. 37 years and one lifetime ago, the first cold thread of a question he didn't want to ask out loud in front of his crew. Again, he said instead. Full saturation, second wave. Vexkel hesitated 1/2 second, no more, before relaying the order. Later, if anyone had asked him, he would not have been able to explain that hesitation. He didn't get the chance to try. Li Sai, 6 light hours out, closed her eyes for a moment and did the thing her people did instead of praying. She remembered. She remembered the human diplomat's voice, low and unhurried, telling her that some species measured strength in ships, and some measured it in decades, and that the galaxy would find out the difference eventually whether it wanted to or not. She opened her eyes and kept watching. Rourke checked his watch. 47 ticks. Still not fixed. Here they come again, he said, and this time when Okonkwo started counting his breaths, nobody told him to stop. 200 ships broke from the main body of the Armada, falling into a tighter formation than the first wave. A lesson learned, however small. Thalvok had ordered full saturation, and full saturation was what he intended to give the single vessel sitting motionless in his path, patient as a rock in a river he fully intended to reroute. On the vigil, Tanis's hands moved steady across her console, running numbers that hadn't changed in 47 years of drills and wouldn't change now. 200 inbound. Estimated impact in 90 seconds. Hold position, Rourke said. Weapons stay locked until I say otherwise. Cop, Tanis said, and then quieter, mostly to herself. 90 seconds. Feels longer when it's real. Okonkwo's breath count reached 30 and gave up trying to mean anything. He watched the wall of Karathi's ships grow on his display, each one a small blinking icon that represented somewhere behind it. Actual people who believed with their whole obsidian hearts that this was already over. Rourke thought of his father briefly, the way he always did in the last minute before something large began. Not the accident. Before that, the sound of the old man winding this same watch every night before bed, checking it against nothing in particular, just because it was something you did with your hands when you needed your hands to be doing something. 47 ticks a minute. Never right. Never fixed. He closed the watch and slid it back into his jacket. Here it comes, he said, and the second wave hit. The second wave broke against the silent vigil like surf against a seawall built by people who had never once doubted the math. 9 seconds in, the bridge lights flickered, the first flicker in 47 years of testing. The first sign that anything at all was costing the ship something. Tanis's console threw a soft amber warning, then settled. Shield integrity. 89.4%, she said. Her voice didn't change, but her thumb found her father's dog tags and pressed them flat against her collarbone, just for a second, before returning to the console. That's still nothing, Okonkwo said, though he didn't sound as certain as he had 10 minutes ago. Right? Sir, that's still nothing, Rourke confirmed, and set his coffee down for the first time since Sir 400. He didn't pick it back up. Weapons hold, 3,822 impacts in 31 seconds. On any other ship in either fleet's history, that number alone would have ended the engagement, would have been the last entry in a very short log. On the vigil, it registered as a 10-point dip and a flicker of light that lasted less time than a held breath. On Karath's spire, High Marshal Thalvok watched the same numbers arrive from a different angle, and for the first time in 37 years of campaigns, he found himself doing something he had never needed to do before. Recalculating. 2 waves, Vexkel said, carefully, the way a subordinate says something he suspects his commander does not want to hear. Full saturation on both. Their shields have lost. He checked the figure twice before saying it aloud. 10.6%. 10.6, Thalvok repeated, his 4 eyes narrowed, segmented pupils drawing tight, in 2 waves. 4,000 impacts. Yes, High Marshal. He said nothing for a long moment. The ritual scars on his chest, 14 lines for 14 conquered worlds, felt suddenly like a record of a different war than the one in front of him. He had never fought anything that didn't break by the 3rd wave. He had never needed to ask what came after the 3rd wave, because nothing had ever survived to see it. Full armada, he said. Everything we have. Vexkel's mandibles clicked once, hesitation quickly swallowed. High Marshal, if we commit the full, I said everything. 6 light hours away, Ambassador Lisai watched the order relay across the tactical channels her observation vessel was quietly and not entirely legally monitoring. She had expected the second wave to break something. She had not expected the response to be a third wave larger than the first two combined. She thought again of the human diplomat, 19 years gone from her memory until this week, and the particular way he'd smiled when he said it. We don't raise our voice until we mean it. She wondered, watching the full weight of the Karate Dominion crawl forward into the gray reach, whether Thalvok understood yet that he was the one teaching the galaxy what that sentence meant. One wave at a time. She recorded everything. It was, after 6,800 years, the only thing her people were truly good at. Back on the Vigil, the bridge had gone quiet in a different way than before. Not the stillness of routine, but the stillness of people who had just watched their instruments confirm something they'd trained for but never fully believed. 1,000 ships, Okonkwo said. His breath count had abandoned him completely. He wasn't even pretending anymore. That's the whole armada. That's everything they brought. I see it, Rourke said. He didn't move from where he stood, hands loose at his sides, watching the wall of red icons fill his display like a slow tide finally reaching the high mark it had been building toward all morning. Somewhere behind those icons were 1,000 crews who believed, the way Thalvok believed, that force answered force and more force answered more. Admiral Reyes is hailing, Tanis said. Put her through. Reza's voice came steady through the comm, unhurried as ever, 2 dogs barking silently in a photograph 6 light years away. Captain, they've committed the full fleet. I see that too, Admiral. You are cleared to respond if and when you deem it necessary. That determination is yours. Copy, Rourke said. Standing by, he looked at Tanis, then at Okonkwo, the way he did every morning on his slow walk down 11 meters of deck that didn't need checking. Neither of them needed him to say anything. They'd trained for 47 years to not need him to say anything, and that had always been the point of the training. Not bravery, not aggression, just the long, unglamorous discipline of being ready and not showing it. Here it comes, he said anyway, because some habits you keep even when they're not strictly necessary. 9,147 impacts struck the hull in 43 seconds, a number that would take the Vigil's engineers weeks to fully process afterward. A number that in the moment, the full armada opened fire as 1,000 ships committing everything they had in a single continuous barrage that turned the space around the silent Vigil into a sustained storm of light. Registered on the bridge only as a 2-second blackout and the smell of overheated conduit somewhere aft, the lights died. Emergency lighting kicked in a half-second later, red and low, throwing long shadows across 3 faces that didn't panic. Shield integrity, Tanis said into the sudden dark, and her voice for the first time all morning carried the smallest tremor. 63.2%. Okonkwo didn't say anything. He'd stopped counting breaths sometime in the last minute and simply held one, watching the number on his own console like it might change if he stared hard enough. Rourke stood. He walked, unhurried, to the comms panel. The same slow walk, the same 11 meters, except now the deck plating beneath his boots carried a faint vibration that hadn't been there an hour ago. He didn't check his watch this time. There wasn't a need. He already knew what it would say. High Marshal Thalvok, he said, opening the channel. His voice was the same voice he'd used to order 3 degrees of trajectory change an hour ago, level, unhurried, entirely without heat. Please stand by. On Korath's spire, the words reached Thalvok's war room through a translation matrix that stripped some of the calm out of them and left only the shape, a statement, not a threat, delivered by a species he had until 9 seconds ago. This is Captain Elias Rourke of the Terran vessel Silent Vigil. You have fired on a Terran military vessel in unprovoked aggression against a sovereign colony. I am authorized to respond. He paused, just long enough for the words to cross the distance and land. Considered beneath the dignity of a full engagement. Please stand by. He had heard surrender speeches. He had heard defiance. He had heard, in 37 years of conquest, every register a dying species used when it understood the end had arrived. He had never heard anything that sounded like this patient, almost bureaucratic, the tone of someone confirming a delivery time rather than ending an empire's certainty. Vexkel, he said. What did they just fire? Nothing yet, High Marshal. Our sensors show no. The Silent Vigil's main weapon activated for the first time in 47 years of quiet construction and quieter waiting. A 2-second burst that did not look, on any sensor, like a weapon at all. No visible discharge, no heat bloom. No projectile crossing the gap between the two fleets. Just a field, spreading outward at the edge of detection, unmaking the molecular structure of everything it touched. 312 Karathi ships stopped being ships. They did not explode. They did not burn. They simply came apart, hull and crew and cargo alike, into a slow-drifting field of component matter that had, 8 seconds earlier, been the forward third of the largest armada the Karathi Dominion had ever assembled. The disassembly field had been developed over 29 years. Someone would write later, in a report that would circulate through every command structure in the Covenant within a week. It had never been fired in combat. The first target was a warship. The second was an Empire's confidence. The Silent Vigil rotated, slow and unhurried, the way Rourke walked his 11 meters of deck. Thalvok gripped the arms of his command chair with 2 of his 4 hands. The other 2 braced against the console as the deck shuddered beneath him. Not from impact, he realized. It fired again. The second burst caught 141 ships mid-turn, vessels that had already begun retreating when the disassembly field reached them anyway. There was no outrunning a weapon that didn't travel. But from the ship's own structure, trying and failing to compensate for the sudden absence of 312 vessels that had, until 90 seconds ago, been holding formation around it. "Pull back," he said. "Full retreat. All ships. Full retreat. High Marshal. The jump point is—" "I know where the jump point is." Vexkel relayed the order with a speed that suggested he'd been waiting for permission to give it since the first wave failed. Across the remaining ships of the Armada, engines that had never once been ordered to run from an engagement spun up for exactly that purpose, a maneuver none of them had drilled because none of them had ever needed it. On the Silent Vigil's bridge, Okonkwo watched the retreat begin and found his voice again, thin but steady. "They're running, sir. Whole fleet, braking for the jump point." "Let them," Rourke said. Tanis looked up from her console, surprised enough to break her own composure for half a second. "Sir, we're not here to chase anyone down, Commander. We're here to make sure they never come back." He checked his watch, 47 ticks, unhurried as ever, and closed it. "Track their jump vectors. I want to know exactly how many make it out." 6 light hours distant, Lisai watched the retreat begin and felt the old stone in her chest shift into something new. In 6,800 years of cataloging wars, she had watched 100 fleets break formation and run. She had never watched one run from an enemy that hadn't chased it. She opened a private channel to her own government, the first message she'd sent in 11 years, that she marked as urgent. "The Covenant needs to see this," she wrote. "Not the battle, the retreat. Send the recording to every seat on the council before someone tries to explain it away as anything other than what it is." She didn't wait for a reply, she kept recording. Rourke poured himself a second cup of coffee he didn't drink, just held, the way you hold something with your hands when your hands need to be doing anything but nothing. It was, he thought, not so different from Okonkwo's counting or Tanis's thumb against her father's tags. Everyone found their own way to keep their hands busy while the universe rearranged itself around them. 301 ships broke for the jump point, Tanis reported. 87 didn't make it before we're not firing again unless they turn, Rourke said. Confirm that with all stations. Copy, Tanis said, and something in her voice had changed, not relief. Not yet, but the first loosening of a muscle that had been locked since Dosh 44E12. Okonkwo, meanwhile, had gone quiet in a different way, staring at a secondary readout that had nothing to do with the retreating fleet. Sir, High Marshal Thalvok's ship. Life signs are. He stopped. Go on, Lieutenant, Rourke said. There aren't any, sir. Not on the command deck. The field caught the forward third of the spire along with the escort ships around it. I don't think he made the retreat order because I don't think he was still. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rourke set his coffee down for the second time that morning. He didn't feel triumph. He'd expected, somewhere in the 29 years of quiet construction that built this ship, that the moment might come with some kind of weight attached to it, some sense of having finally done the thing he'd trained half his adult life to do. Instead, it felt like closing a door that had been open too long, letting the cold finally out of a room. Cop that, was all he said. The last transmission from Karath's spire reached 3 surviving escort vessels before the ship's own systems failed entirely. It was 3 words, garbled through a resonator that had already begun losing power, translated later by Covenant linguists into the plainest possible English, because there was no way to make it sound like anything other than what it was. What are they? Nobody on those 3 ships had an answer. They carried the recording home anyway, 47 light-years back to the nearest Karathi outpost, arriving with a story that would take the Dominion's remaining command structure the better part of a week to even begin believing. On the silent vigil, the bridge had gone quiet in the particular way that follows something enormous, not silence exactly, but a kind of hush people fall into when they've just watched a number become real. 946 ships destroyed. 301 fleeing toward the jump point. 87 caught before they reached it. We stopped counting at 6,000, Okonkwo said, half to himself, staring at the impact log that had simply stopped updating individual numbers somewhere past that mark because the system itself had run out of a meaningful way to keep tallying them. Tanis looked at him. What? The impacts? They're weapons. Somewhere past 6,000 the log he gestured at his screen. It stopped mattering how many more came after that. We'd already survived it. 6,000 was just where the number quit meaning anything new. Rourke heard it from across the bridge and said nothing, but he filed it away the way he filed most things that mattered, quietly, without comment, to be taken out again later when it was time. He walked to the viewport. The debris field drifted where the leading edge of the armada had been an hour ago, slow and silent, catching no light because there was nothing nearby bright enough to catch. Somewhere in that field were the remains of 14 ritual scars that would never be added to, an empire's certainty scattered into component matter that would drift the Grey Reach for longer than anyone currently alive would be around to measure. He thought, briefly, of his father winding this watch every night, checking it against nothing in particular. He didn't take it out this time. There would be time for that later. Admiral, he said instead, opening the channel back to Watchpoint Station. Engagement is concluded. Awaiting instruction. Reese's voice came back steady as ever, though it took her a half-second longer to answer than it usually did, the only sign, in 42 years of unshaken calm, that even she had needed a moment to absorb what her own instruments had just shown her. "Cop that, Captain," she said. "Hold position. The Covenant is going to want to see this for themselves, and I suspect they're not going to believe it the first time." The Covenant Council chamber received the recording 14 hours later, relayed through 6 separate translation matrices before it reached the main floor. No one spoke for the first 9 minutes. Council Speaker Amara Voss, a Terran herself, watched the footage of 312 ships disappearing in a single cascade of light and understood, for the first time in her diplomatic career, why her own government had never volunteered a demonstration. Motion to classify the Grey Reach as a restricted zone, someone finally said. No entry without Terran clearance. The vote came back 847 to 39. Humanity didn't object. It didn't need to. The zone had already been protected for 47 years. The vote simply put a name on what had always been true. On the silent vigil, Rourke sat alone in his quarters for the first time since 048, the ship's engines finally allowed to warm past their 47-year idle. He didn't feel like celebrating, and none of his crew expected him to. Tanis had gone quiet, in the way people go quiet after relief finally arrives, not smiling, just breathing easier. He held it the way his father used to hold it, weighing it in his palm before checking it against nothing in particular, and thought about the mining colony and the wreckage. Okonkwo had stopped counting altogether, for the first time anyone could remember, and simply sat at his station watching the debris field drift, saying nothing. Rourke reached into his jacket and pulled out the watch. He didn't open it right away. And the 19 years he'd spent afterward learning that surviving something wasn't the same as being finished with it. He thought about Vex Kell, too, the half-second hesitation before relaying the full armada order, the small resistance nobody would ever know about because the ship carrying that memory had come apart along with everyone else aboard it. Not every Karathi had believed in the certainty their High Marshal carried. It hadn't mattered. Certainty, once a fleet commits to it, doesn't leave room for the ones who doubt. 6 light hours out, Lisai watched the recording for the 14th time. Each time, she noticed something new, not in the battle, which she'd stopped rewatching after the 4th pass, but in the quiet after it. The humans hadn't cheered. They hadn't broadcast the victory to their own systems, hadn't marked it with anything resembling triumph. They had simply logged it, filed it, and gone back to drinking coffee that had long since gone cold. She thought of the diplomat again, 19 years gone, the low, unhurried way he'd told her something she hadn't understood until this week. She wondered if he was still alive somewhere on Earth, still saying things people wouldn't understand until it was almost too late to matter. She closed the recording and did not open it again. Rourke opened the watch. The second hand ticked 47 times before he closed it again. The same broken gear turning the same wrong rhythm it had turned every day for as long as he'd carried it. His father had never fixed it either. Rourke understood now, in a way he hadn't fully let himself understand before this morning, that some things weren't meant to be corrected. They were meant to be carried, imperfect, exactly as they'd been handed down. Tanis appeared in his doorway, dog tag still resting against her collarbone. Admiral Reyes wants a full report by end of shift, sir. And the council's asking for a statement, something for the record. Tell them we stopped counting at 6,000, Rourke said. Tanis paused. That's it. That's the whole statement. That's the whole statement. She almost asked him to explain it. She'd been aboard long enough to know he wouldn't, and long enough to understand that the explanation wasn't really the point. 6,000 years of learning how to break things apart in the dark of space. Quietly, patiently, without an audience. That was a story too large to fit into a council transcript, and Rourke had never much cared for large stories. He preferred the small ones. A watch, a cup of coffee, 11 meters of deck, walked the same way every morning whether anything was happening or not. She left him to it. The last transmission from the Karathi Dominion's remaining command structure reached Watchpoint Station 3 days later. Not a threat, not a plea, just a request for terms. Reyes read it once, set it aside, and drafted her reply in 4 sentences. She had never raised her voice in 42 years of service. The terms didn't need one. The gray reach settled back into its old quiet, the debris field drifting slower now, spreading thin across a stretch of space that had waited 47 years to matter, and would likely wait much longer before it mattered again. The silent vigil powered down its engines once more. Running lights dimmed. Hull settling into the same patient stillness it had worn since before most of its crew were born. Rourke poured his coffee at 0400, same as always. He closed the watch, set it on the console beside him, and let the second hand keep its wrong rhythm, ticking 47 times a minute into a silence that had never really been silence at all. Just patience, waiting for someone to finally ask what it had been listening for.